So thanks for all coming along today. Thanks for coming to listen to me. There is supposed to be a thing on there that tells you what you're listening to, but it's not working. But my name's Marcus Johnstone. I'm the solicitor, head of the firm at PCD Solicitors. We're based in Warrington, and we're a crime firm. My background's always been in crime. To me, it's the only interesting area of law around. Some of you may disagree. Some people might want to fancy a career filling in conveyances every day or leases, but that's, whatever floats your boat. To me, it's always been crime is the most interesting area. So I've always done crime. And then a few years back, because of all the developments in sexual crime, it's not to everybody's taste, but I set up a firm, PCD, to deal and concentrate solely on that area of law. So I think the way crime's going these days is that, well, with any area, you need to try and specialise if you can. It's difficult to know everything about everything. So if you can specialise and make a niche, make a name for yourself, then hopefully that helps you progress in your own career. When I was asked by John to do a talk today, he said, just tell them about why they should do crime. I said, well, it's not really for me to tell you why you do crime, but I thought what might be of some interest is if I gave you maybe one or two case studies of people we deal with. So I'd like to start by telling you a story about Andrew. And Andrew was a young man it was late on a Friday afternoon, and my office received a call from this young man who was quite desperate. He was quite upset on the phone, and he'd been accused of committing a sexual offence against an ex-girlfriend. And I was in a conference, I couldn't speak to him straight away, but my colleague said, well, look, Marcus will probably call you back later on. And got his number, and then it was later that day. I didn't have things in a conference, I had some other calls, and I was at home later. It got to about 8 o'clock, and I thought, well, there was something niggling in my mind that I'd not actually spoke to this Andrew. So I'll just give him a quick call now and see what is, just say hello, that it's not been forgotten, and we'll perhaps chat over the weekend when we've got more time. And I rang him up about 8 o'clock in the evening, and he answered. We got chatting, and he seemed to be outside somewhere, walking around, and we started talking about the problem that he's facing. He had this ex-girlfriend, they split up, he'd got a new girlfriend, and she'd now made an allegation of rape. So a very serious allegation. He was extremely upset, distraught. He'd been waiting about 6 months, having been arrested, with no contact from the duty solicitor, no help from anybody, and he was really at his wit's end as to what he was going to do. So we chatted around about half an hour, and after about half an hour I could hear lots of wind rustling, and he seemed to be walking. He was upset, he was crying, and I said, Andrew, where are you? You sound like you're outside. It's like 8 o'clock on a Friday. What are you doing? He says, believe it or not, Marcus, he says, I've driven half an hour to get here, and I've walked half an hour. I'm in the middle of a forest somewhere. I'm not too sure where I am. And I've got a bottle of vodka, and I've got a ton of pills. And I was just about to kill myself when you rang. And it just knocked me for six. And we spoke till about 10 o'clock that night, 2 hours on the phone. Managed to talk him round, have a chat to him about what's gone on, about his life, about the situation he's got into now, and how we try and resolve it. How do we work through this problem with him? And he started to see some sense in that, and didn't kill himself, fortunately. And we started working with him. And it was about 6 months, 8 months later, that we then had a letter from the prosecution service taking no further action. He'd not been charged, it was just under investigation. But the effect it has on people is profound. Just going through an allegation like that and how you deal with it. And that gives you an indication of how serious this kind of work is and how you can help people even from an early stage. Another chap, Richard, another client of ours, again pre-charge, but going from the other extreme, because in crime we have, I suppose with sexual crime, there's different levels of seriousness, if I can say that. You've got perhaps rape at the most serious. It carries a life sentence potentially, 5 to 9 years as a starting point for anybody convicted. It's a serious offence. And then at the other end of the scale, you may have something much more minor. It might be an online communication or an indecent image. It's not to say it's not serious stuff, but it's at the lower end. And this Richard, he was in that category. He'd been accused of downloading, making an indecent image of a child. Now that's a lowish category. The police are charging people or accusing people of these cases all the time. The internet is full of this problem. We have so many cases like that. And this Richard was distraught because just by an allegation, he had lost his job because the police notify your employer. He's then suspended from his employment. Because he couldn't do his work, he was then ultimately sacked from his job. The social services are notified by the police and the child services, so he couldn't see his own children. He was not allowed, with his standard bail condition, to have any contact with anybody under the age of 18 years old. His wife walked out, he had no money, he ended up sleeping in his car. Right? His life was pretty much destroyed by an allegation of what we might think is a relatively minor offence. And we dealt with him for probably about 6, 8, 12 months maybe, and he was just under investigation. And the investigations, because it's based on forensic data, downloads from computers and phones, they can take a long time. And it's the delay, it's the wait that causes so much stress to people these days. It's the uncertainty, the unknown. It's how do you get through this problem? So although we as a firm are there to try and help people from a legal point of view, a lot of it's almost just holding their hands and trying to guide them through it and give them some support. But some people can cope better than others. And Richard was just found it really, really difficult to cope. And it went on for a long time. And so even though we would say, look, we don't see this going anywhere, we think it's wrong, we had lots of reasons how this image could have been on his device without his knowledge. And there's so many reasons how this can happen. That we tried to give them support. Eventually, after about 12 months, a letter came through the post from the prosecution service taking no further action because it said there's no reasonable prospect of a conviction, no longer any reasonable prospect of a conviction. Unfortunately, they sent the letter second-class post, and it arrived the day after he killed himself. So had they sent it first-class post, it should have arrived the day before he killed himself. So again, another example of what happens even if somebody's not yet been charged, and the devastating effects it has on them, but also their family. It destroys everybody. And that's even before somebody's accused of it, even before they're charged with it. But there's an awful lot of work that we have to do as a lawyer to try and safeguard that person's position. But you can't help everybody. Another quick story with another young lad, a represented, who doesn't live a million miles from where we are now. And he was 25 years old, and he was accused of a sexual offence, 7 sexual offences, charged with 7 counts of rape against a family member from 5 years earlier. She was 12/13 years old, and she alleged several offences of rape. He was 25 when he saw it, about 19, 20 when this is supposed to have happened. He said this is completely made up, totally made up. And my view, whenever we deal with these cases, and we have a lot of them, where a girl, a woman, makes an allegation of a sexual assault, my instinct is I believe the person who says they've been accused. I'm probably more severe than anybody else in the firm, because I'll talk to members of staff and say, what do you think? Do you believe him? And all the people in the firm say, oh yes, he's such a nice guy, I believe him. What do you think, Marcus? I think, no, he's guilty. I just don't believe that. I take a lot of convincing. Anyway, this James, who we were dealing with, he did convince me, and we got to speak a lot, and we went through his case over a period of months. And there was so much that we started to find out by way of evidence. He was charged, and we're then into the Crown Court process, going through Liverpool Crown Court. But as the case progressed, we found out, for example, that she had mental health issues, as many complainants have in these types of cases. In fact, many defendants have mental health issues. But we found out there's lots of mental health problems. Now, we can't automatically get rights to see somebody's medical records. We're not allowed, unless we've got really good grounds or reasons to try and get access to something if it's connected to the case. We managed to convince the prosecution service that there was a reason to have some knowledge of her therapy records, because our suspicion was that she may well have said something to a therapist which would affect this case. Eventually the CPS did agree to look at those records themselves, and they then did disclose some of the records, which showed that she'd admitted to her therapist that she had a propensity to make up stories. She would tell lies. It might be that she's having a new hairdo, or having her nails done, or has won the lottery, but would make up stories to gain attention from her friends. Now you can see the connection why that might be important, because our whole point is, well, look, this is a made-up story. This is false. Now, if she makes other false stories up, that's a problem for the prosecution. So we had that. We also found, by more delving around, that she'd previously made false allegations against other young lads, which were not taken up by the police, but the police didn't choose to tell us about this. We also found, believe it or not, that she'd made a previous allegation of rape against another man who had also been prosecuted and gone to the Crown Court at Liverpool and found not guilty. And that was 2 months before she made the allegations against my client. So we had all this information, and there was so many other issues that I said to James, look, I can't believe they're even prosecuting this case. But this day and age, they do routinely get prosecuted. And so that went all the way to a trial. And it took a 5-day trial. I sat through, I was there, reached the 5 days, and it finished around about 3 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. And I said to my colleague who was there, well, look, I'm going to shoot back to the office and just deal with one or two things. By the time I got from the Crown Court and I walked down to Liverpool 1, where the car was parked, probably 20 minutes. By the time I got there, my phone went, and it was my colleague who said, you're not going to believe this, Marcus, but the jury's been out, been back in, and found him not guilty on all 7 counts of rape. And that case took 3.5 years to get to trial. And it took the jury 20 minutes to find him not guilty on all 7 counts. And that was including 5 minutes walking from the courtroom to the deliberation room and back to the courtroom. It's the quickest jury decision I've ever known. And it sort of gives you an indication of some of the problems we've got with the Crown Court and the criminal justice system. There's so many issues. And so from your side as prospective lawyers, barristers, solicitors, whatever you might want to be, my view is consider crime, because to me it's the most interesting area. There's nothing like it. I mean, if you put me in a room and said, Marcus, you've got to deal with leases every day, or contracts, or what about writing a nice big fancy will for somebody? Well, just kill me now. I've just had enough. I've lost the will to live. But if I can go to court each day and deal with real problems, but problems where somebody might go to prison for life, there's nothing like it. And we'll take some questions and answers in a short while if anybody wants to ask. But 2 of my colleagues, Dylan and Hannah here, I think they started with me probably a year ago. So they're happy to answer any questions from your point of view as a new prospective lawyer. But they've both been to cases, both sat in on jury trials. And I think they'd both tell you, as I would say to you, that there is a moment in a case, and there is nothing like it in life, that will cut the tension. And that's the moment when somebody's fighting for their life. They are either, when the jury goes out and they come back in and they've made a decision, and there's about a 5 or 10 second gap between when the judge says, how do you find? Is he guilty or not guilty? While they're asked that question. And the spokesperson will stand up. And at that moment, it's silence in the courtroom. And you know that in 10 seconds later, that person is either going to be walking home with the family and celebrating, or going to prison for 14 years. And there's that 10-second gap, and the tension, there is nothing like it. Nothing like it. And so if you can be in that situation where you can influence that, where you can assist somebody, where you can try and prepare them for what might happen, but to guide them through, bear in mind it's probably 3 years, 4 years, maybe sometimes 5 years, when you've known that person and you get to that stage. And that's what we're working towards. And so you've got to be the best of what you can be, whether you're a solicitor, whether you're a barrister, whether you're an administration person within that case. You've all got a role to play, but you have to be the best at what you can be. You know, there was a young chap I was speaking to downstairs. Said, well, what would you look for in a new barrister? So, well, unfortunately, we don't really deal with much young barristers. And it's not because I'm nasty. It's just because we're dealing with cases where people can go to prison for life. So if I'm appointing a barrister, I need a barrister with maybe 15, 20, 25 years experience. It makes a difference. You need people with experience. But from your young person's perspective, how do you get to that stage? It's difficult. All you can do is you chip away. You just got to keep battling. You've got to keep pushing forward. You've got to just learn as much as you can, be the best at what you can do. Do the best job you can possibly do for any firm that instructs you. And you will get there. You will get there. And I've known some barristers. I mean, one barrister, Sushil, many, many years ago. And he was based in a London set of chambers. And he was a young barrister. But we do use some youngish ones now and again. And he did a fantastic job for us. But he went over and above what anybody else would ever do. And if we chat afterwards, I'm happy to tell you more about what he did. But he got more and more work because he was so dedicated and went beyond what other people would do, even with his attendance notes and the advice he would give. And I said to Sushil at the time, I said, Sushil, I can't believe how good you are for a young person. I said, give it 10 years, you'll be a judge. And he was laughing his head off. Guess what? He's now a judge. So he progresses and he's only a young lad. He's only a young lad, but he's now a judge. And you can see that in people. So you've just got to try and do the very best you can, but do something that you want to do. Choose the area of law that you want to do. Because if you enjoy it, then it's not really like work. It's just fun. And I love every day of the job that I do. It's not work to me at all. And if you make some money from it, then it's a bonus. But if you don't make any money, well, hopefully you're still happy because you do what you like to do. So that's pretty much what I was going to say. I could talk all day, but I know we're limited on time. And there may be some questions and answers, question session. But does anybody have any questions either for me or for my colleagues? Yep.
Hi, I'm Carolina, and I love the criminal, but I never really thought about doing the sexual offences. But you swayed me a bit more now, so that's great. My question is a bit broader, and it was on the issues of the delays in the Crown Court and the investigations in regards to sexual offences that you were talking about earlier. I was curious if you had any thoughts regarding the new proposals for, say, a middle court that's been quite evident in the news lately, and how that could affect the sexual offences area.
It's a good question. I mean, there's been so much that's gone on over years with the criminal justice system and the court system, and it's all linked. The court system, do we have a jury? Do we keep juries? Do we scrap juries? The magistrate system as opposed to the Crown Court system. Then what about the prisons, because they're all full? And then you've got all new crimes coming along because most crime now is on the internet. And so it makes me feel dead old because I can remember life before the internet. You probably can't. You can, sorry about that. But most people can't remember life before the internet. You've all grown up with the internet. I remember life before the internet. And there was no internet crime when I was younger, because there was no internet. Now everything, almost all the crime is on the internet. And yet no solicitors or barristers really know much about internet crime. So it shows where the market is. And so when I set PCD up, we did it because I was concentrating on the new exploding area of sex crime, particularly on the internet. So that's where it's a massive market, and we're a niche firm, we're a specialised firm, and hopefully we do well because of that. But as far as your question goes, it's fascinating to figure out where it's all leading. I don't know what the answer is, because the governments don't want to put the money into prisons. They don't want to put the money into the court systems. The courts are all knackered and falling down. They're closing loads of them and selling them off for private development. They're leaking, they're old, they've got no heating, so they're too cold in the winter or they're too hot in the summer. And the system is a mess. But the governments don't really want to get involved in that because it costs money and the taxpayers don't like to pay for criminals. It's like with the legal aid budget. It's constantly being cut because nobody wants to pay for criminals. And so, yes, I mean, the Labour government until the recent change, there's a lot done on prisons about trying to deal with the court system in the prisons. And then they're talking about, well, do we scrap some of the juries or restrict the juries? Do we have a system where we could perhaps bring a judge with some magistrates to deal with these cases to speed things up? There's all different possibilities that they will talk about. And some things will happen, things will need to change. Hopefully they don't scrap the jury system, because that's our one safeguard from my point of view when we're dealing with these cases. It really is the saving grace, because I've spent many, many years probably been in every magistrates court in the country over the years with cases, and almost every magistrates court will just look to convict. Maybe I'm a bit one-sided, but judges in the magistrates court or magistrates in the magistrates court are very much pro-prosecution, in my view, and they will just look to convict. It's not a fair system. Whereas in the Crown Court, because you're dealing with 12 ordinary people, you tend to get a fairer outcome. But that's very expensive because there's lots of delays. And I think I touched on in one or two of the case studies there, 3, 4, 5 years from when a case starts to eventually getting to a Crown Court. It's a ridiculous delay. It's no benefit to anybody. I've had people kill themselves, clients kill themselves because of the delay. And equally, people who are accused, people who are the victims of crime, the complainants, why do they have to wait 5 years? I mean, it's a nonsense. The whole system is wrong. But we could talk about that one question forever, but sorry. Anybody else? Yeah, sorry.
Thank you for your talk, Marcus. And I have 2 questions, mainly about stereotypes against sexual people suspected of committing sexual offences. First question, you mentioned the importance of jury trials, but there's also a problem that jurors may be prejudiced against those accused because of rape myths or stereotypes regarding a stereotypical victim or an offender. And the second question is that, given that the society is mainly antipathetic against sexual offenders, do you think your work as a lawyer specialized in sexual offences, do you think the works are more noble than other criminal lawyers, given the deluge of hatred against your clients?
I think juries are generally very fair. So, yes, there are stereotypes and there's prejudices within society and all walks of life. But I do find that when it goes to the Crown Court to a jury, juries on the whole tend to be very fair. Whatever the background of the complainant, whatever they look like, whatever colour of the skin, wherever they're from, the juries tend to be fair. That's my take on things. And I think that's reflected in the conviction rates. Conviction rates are a lot higher in the magistrates than the Crown Court. But I think you do get a fairer system. But there are prejudices out there. And I think there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. We don't keep statistics. And you've probably all heard about, for example, the grooming gangs, where there are predominantly Asian Muslim men. And you think, well, hang about, is that right? Is it wrong? But there's not really any statistics. But I've dealt with grooming gangs for 20 years around the north of England. And you do find different sort of types of people commit types of crimes. It's really, really strange. I've got doctors, surgeons who are involved and have a liking for a particular type of indecent image of a child. It's most peculiar. Now, why are we not doing any kind of research as to what kind of people are committing what kind of crimes? It's nothing to do with prejudice, it's nothing to do with being racist. It's trying to figure out why are people committing crimes and how do we stop people committing crimes? How do we solve this problem as a whole community to make it better for everybody? These questions are good questions and there's no easy answer to them. It's so complex. But that's what makes crime good, because it's interesting for everybody to get involved with, to try and solve these problems. But we could perhaps talk again a bit later on, so there's a big question. Was there anybody else quickly, because I know we're running out of time, but yep.
How do you not take any of it home with you? Like, you get invested into the people you work for?
Yeah, it's difficult. It's a good question. People ask me that. I don't really know the answer. I think maybe I've always looked at something from a legal point of view. I'm always interested to know how it works from a legal side and how we solve the problem. And people say, well, how can you represent people that commit sex crimes? And sometimes I always have a bit of a joke to say, well, yeah, but every client ever comes to us. We're the only firm where every one of our clients is innocent. They're all innocent when they come to us. But they all tell us that, and no doubt some are guilty, but it's not my decision. It's the jury that decides. So if you came to me, any one of you, and said, well, I'm innocent, I've not done this, but I've been accused, then we represent you. And if you come to me and say, well, I'm guilty, then we represent you, but on a guilty plea to try and look at mitigation. Because everybody has a background, everybody has a story as to how they've got to where they are. If somebody does something wrong in their lives, it's usually because of some reason as to why they've got to that position. And it's not for me to criticise them. It's not for me to say, well, I'm not going to help you because I just don't like what you've done. I mean, you might get some situations where I don't particularly want to take on a type of client, but you know, that occasionally happens. But every client is really interesting. I've dealt with some psychopaths, proper psychopaths, extremely dangerous people. I've dealt with a lad recently who had a first-class degree in law, super intelligent, but he was a psychopath. And the crimes that he's committed, he's now serving 10 years, were horrendous. That's a young lad. So, but it's really interesting from a lawyer's perspective to figure out, well, how is he in that situation? Sometimes we never know the answers, but it's really interesting from a legal point. Anybody else? Anything else quick? Yeah, sorry, go on.
Is that me?
Yeah.
So you're a solicitor, am I right?
Yes.
What's the client relationship like? How does it differ barrister to solicitor, and why did you choose a solicitor?
I chose it initially because I had no confidence. When I was young, your age now, I had no confidence. So I wouldn't have had the confidence to do advocacy. I was like a terrified little mouse. I wouldn't have done anything. How I ended up in law, I had no idea. I had no confidence. And it's only so many years later, when you get to my age, that you actually realise that everybody's full of bullshit anyway. Right? It's all bullshit. It's just how big you can bullshit. And so, as a barrister, the good barristers are great bullshitters. They've just had lots of years' practice of talking bullshit. And it's the same with law. But it's easier from a solicitor's perspective because we deal with people that come in from the street. We can control our business more. We can get more business in with more of the advertising we do. We can nurture the clients, and then we give the work out to the barristers. Unless we do it ourselves, because solicitors now can have higher rights and they can go to court, etc. So there's not much of a difference. But I think it's harder to be a barrister than it is a solicitor now. Because as a young barrister, you're self-employed, you're trying to get work in. Firms like mine probably won't give you the work because we want the experienced barristers. It's a catch-22. So how do you start? And it's really, really difficult as a young barrister, where I think it's easier as a solicitor because you can you can control your own destiny more, and you can do everything you want, whether you want to do office-based work, working on files, which is important, but also whether you want to do the advocacy and go and do the trials. So all the options are there. So for me, I think solicitor is preferable, but then you talk to other people in the hall downstairs later, and there's mostly chambers there, barristers, and they'll probably tell you something different. Anybody, have we got time for a quick one? Anything else? Yeah, hi.
I'd just like to know, so in criminal law, there's a lot of tragedy events gonna happen. So I just want to know, how do you deal with the mental pressure, when you have to face those tragedies or very serious?
Again, I don't honestly know the answer. I think sometimes you're just built in a certain way, how you look at something, how you deal with something, how you cope with it. It's like we've got clients that some clients can cope really well. The young lad I mentioned, James, who was only 25 with going through the 7 rape, 3 years or so to go through. I used to say to him each day, I can't believe how well you're dealing with this case. And the day-to-day of going through the case, he handled it remarkably well, incredibly well. It's now probably 3 or 4 years after his finding of not guilty, and he pops into the office every now and again for a coffee to see us. And he's recently, a couple of months back, he said, I've just been diagnosed with PTSD because of the court case. And he said, my life will never be the same. He said, I can't, from the moment I was found not guilty, I've not been able to go out. I've not met a girl. I can't go to a pub. I can't go to a club. I said, I'm scared to death of talking to anybody in case I'm accused falsely again of doing something I've not done. I can't go through 3 years of a trial again. And it's destroyed his life. So it affects everybody. And it does have an effect, especially when you get clients that kill themselves. And you think, well, could we have done anything? And the one that mentioned it with the letter that came a day late, that's particularly difficult. But it's the effect it has on everybody. But all we can do is how do we get the best for the client, and how can we try and help somebody to make the system better so things like that don't happen in the future. I'm sure they will, because the system's getting worse unless people like you do something about it.